At 6 in the morning, when the mist was still hanging low over the water, and the only sound was the lap of waves against the dock, I was out there, in my waders launching my little aluminum boat, like I'd done 1,000 times before. And then I heard it, this shrill voice cutting through the quiet, like a siren. Arrest him, I look up and see Marlene Crawford, our HOA president, stomping down my dock like she was leading a cavalry charge. Her finger pointed right at me. Behind her, a half-awake sheriff's deputy looked like he'd just wandered into the wrong movie, fumbling with his cuffs. I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so surreal. "Lady, this is my dock, my lake," I said, water dripping down my sleeves. "Not anymore," she shouted, spit flying perfume, cutting through the smell of wet pine. And before I could say another word, those metal cuffs clicked around my wrists. Neighbors started coming out on their decks, coffee mugs in hand, phones recording. My boat bobbed quietly beside us, looking as innocent as a boat could look. 10 minutes later, I owned her Marina. But let me back up, because this war didn't start on the dock. It started months earlier with a letter. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Emily after a brutal fight with cancer. We'd bought this lake property as our forever place, 12 acres of peace we'd worked our whole lives to afford. Every morning we'd sit on that dock with our coffee, watching the mist lift off the water like the world was exhaling. When she passed, I kept the routine going, me and my German Shepherd Duke, heading out before sunrise, letting the quiet and the fishing keep me sane. That dock became more than wood and nails. It was my therapy, my church, my lifeline, which is probably why it hit so hard the day I got that certified letter with the HOA's fancy logo at the top. $500 fine for unauthorized watercraft storage, and an order to remove my boat launch because it violated community waterfront uniformity. I sat at the kitchen table reading it 3 times, Duke curled at my feet, wondering how a bunch of neighbors I barely knew had suddenly decided my dock was a threat to civilization. Enter Marlene, the self-proclaimed savior of Pine Hollow Lake. She'd taken over the HOA like a general staging a coup, and within a month, violation notices tripled. People got fined for having Christmas lights up on January 3rd, for leaving their trash cans out an extra hour, even for painting their shutters the wrong shade of blue. I figured if I just kept my place tidy and stayed out of her way, she'd burn herself out harassing someone else. Big mistake. When I called her thinking it was just a misunderstanding, she didn't even try to hide the smugness in her voice. "There's no mistake, Mr. Walker," she said. "Your dock is on community water. 30 days to remove it, or we'll escalate enforcement." I told her my property deed included water rights going out 200 feet from shore, but she just said, "The HOA supersedes individual claims when community welfare is threatened," and hung up. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a dock. This was about control. 3 nights later, I got a notice hand-delivered to my door, smelled like her perfume, no joke, summoning all waterfront owners to a mandatory meeting. I walked into that community center expecting a dozen people. Instead, it was packed wall-to-wall metal chairs scraping against the floor as everyone turned to look at me. Marlene sat behind a folding table like she was presiding over the Supreme Court, flanked by her lawyer nephew and 2 board members. "We're here to address a serious threat to property values," she announced, pointing at me like I was on trial. Then they rolled out a survey map claiming my dock extended 15 feet into HOA waters. I could feel 40 pairs of eyes burning holes in me. I stood up, pulled out my original deed and 2009 survey, "Thank you, Emily, for insisting we keep everything in a fireproof safe," and laid them on the table. "This shows my dock is entirely on my property," I said. That's when Mrs. Thompson, my 78-year-old neighbor, stood up in the back and said, "He's been using that dock since before this HOA even existed. My husband and I watched him build it. A few other neighbors chimed in, but Marlene wasn't backing down. "Personal favors don't establish legal precedent," she snapped. 30 days, Mr. Walker, or we pursue legal action." I left that meeting shaking, but I wasn't about to roll over. Instead, I started spending my afternoons at the county recorder's office, flipping through dusty files, listening to the hum of ancient copy machines. And that's when I hit gold. The clerk, a kind woman named Dolores, who'd seen everything in 30 years, slid me a folder and whispered, "You might want to look at this." Inside was Marlene's election paperwork, and it was a mess. Notices had gone out regular mail, half the homeowners never got them, and there were no certified receipts. Legally, the election that put her in power was invalid. Then I found something even bigger. The lease on Hendricks Marina, the only other boat launch on the lake, had expired 2 years ago. The property was technically in tax default and scheduled for auction at the next county sale. I sat there in that stale office air, heart pounding, realizing I was holding the key to this whole mess. If I bought that Marina, Marlene's plan to corner me would blow up in her face. I called Helen Vasquez, a retired HOA lawyer with a reputation for dismantling abusive boards, and she didn't even let me finish the story before saying, "Bring me everything you've got." This sounds like fun. The next morning we were in her office, documents spread across her desk like a war map. "Her election is void. She misused HOA funds for personal deals, and if you buy that marina, you control lake access," Helen said with a grin. "This is how you end it." By Thursday, I had liquidated enough from my retirement to cover the $12,000 in back taxes, and by Friday morning, I was sitting in the courthouse auction room with a certified check in my pocket. The room was nearly empty. "Opening bid, $12,347, the commissioner announced. I raised my hand. No one else did. Sold. Just like that, I owned the marina. I walked out of that courthouse feeling 10 feet tall. Marlene found out an hour later and completely lost it. She called Helen's office screaming about conspiracies, sent her son-in-law to the marina to threaten me with legal action, even showed up herself in a blazing red blazer, heels clicking across the dock. "This fraudulent acquisition will not stand," she shouted, jabbing a finger in my chest. "I'll have this overturned before the week is out." I just smiled. Good luck with that, Marlene. The county's thrilled to have this back on the tax rolls. Her face turned purple, and she stormed off, her lawyer nephew trailing behind, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. But she wasn't done. She started a smear campaign on Facebook, with fake accounts suggesting I was unstable, that grief had made me dangerous. Some neighbors started giving me side-eye at the grocery store. Then she tried to record me in secret, editing the audio to make it sound like I was extorting the HOA. When she played it at the next emergency meeting, I stood up calm as you please and pulled out my own phone. "Funny thing, Marlene, I said I recorded that too, unedited." The room went dead silent as my full version played, exposing her cut-and-paste job. Then I dropped the real bombshells, original lake covenants, proving water rights, belonged to property owners, her invalid election paperwork, and evidence she'd tried to misuse emergency funds to buy out the marina. By the time the county commissioner walked in with a sheriff's deputy to serve her with a cease and desist, the room had completely turned. Her own board members were shaking their heads, embarrassed. Curtis, the lawyer nephew, packed his papers and walked out. Marlene sputtered something about conspiracies, but nobody was listening anymore. The queen had been dethroned. Within a week, Marlene resigned for personal reasons, Derek quit his pretend security job, and the HOA held a proper election. The new board cut violation notices by 70% and started publishing transparent budgets. I reopened the marina to everyone just like the original development promised. Property values jumped, neighbors started talking again, and the lake finally felt like a community instead of a battleground. My proudest moment came the day we launched the Emily Walker Memorial Fishing Program, 25 kids showing up at dawn every Saturday to learn how to fish, Duke trotting between them, like he was running the class. Mrs. Thompson volunteers as the lake historian telling stories about the early days while the kids wait for a bite. For the first time since Emily passed, I felt like the place had joy again. Sometimes when I'm sitting on that dock at sunrise, coffee in hand, I talk to her about all of this, about how something beautiful grew out of such an ugly fight. And yeah, it feels like justice. But tell me what you think. Was I right to fight the HOA this hard? Or did I go too far, buying the marina? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your own HOA nightmare stories, and let's talk about where the line is between protecting a community and controlling it.